Good evening, everybody. I am so glad to see that all of you have chimed in to just hear what we have to offer you tonight as we talk about culturally responsive teaching, how to teach everybody everywhere. And I have a few friends that have already joined me, and I have a few more that are going to join a little later on. And I am just excited about the conversation that we're going to have. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that we will have a brief chat where you can actually see us and we see you for a few minutes after this session on Zoom. And you can find the link to that in the chat. My good friend, Mr. Brett Babineau, will put that in the chat, and you all can feel free to share that with educators all around. I'd like to introduce the two people you see on the screen right now. First, Miss Alyssa Jones from New Orleans via Boston, of course. And we have a good friend of mine, Mr. Alfred Watkins, who resides in the Atlanta, Georgia area. They're going to just talk with us a little bit about what it means to be culturally responsive in today's music education world and some of the things that we can do to be more culturally responsive. If some of us have already started that journey, how we can keep that going and do better by ourselves and by our students so that we give all of our students the best music education experience possible. Alfred, why don't you tell the people a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go to Alyssa, and then we'll just talk about some norms that we'll have for tonight, and then we'll just jump right in. Got to unmute yourself for me, Prof. And turn your camera. There you go.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Dr. Irvin. Alfred Watkins here, and thank you for inviting me in. I'm excited to be back in Louisiana once again. I've been here most recently about 5 years ago when I had the pleasure of conducting the All-State Games. So I'm familiar with much of what happens in your state. I'm glad to be here. I am now a retired teacher. Taught for 37 years in the classroom in Metro Atlanta, Georgia, and now I am happily retired. I'm a native of Jackson, Georgia, a little small metropolis of about 2,500 people, south of Atlanta by about an hour. And I was born in 1954, and the year the Brown versus Board of Education was passed to desegregate schools. My community was mostly Black and white. At that time, I spent 4 years in college at Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, moved to Murphy High School, where I taught for 6 years in the city school system of Atlanta, which was almost all Black. And I spent the last 31 years of my educational career at Lassiter High School, where the school district was exactly 100% the exact opposite. I spent the last 9 years in retirement. I also lead an all-adult community band of around 108 members. I'm the co-founder and the principal conductor of the Codwin Symphony. And that's the short of what I've done.
Oh, that's great. Alyssa, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alyssa Jones. As William said, I have moved to New Orleans from Boston, but I'm originally from Chicago. Also lived in Philly. That's where I did junior high. And yes, I said junior high. I'm dating myself. Junior high and high school. I come to this space today as a full-time composer and arts education consultant, but in Boston, I was part of the music faculty at Boston Arts Academy for about 12 years, and then moved into central office as the program director for performing arts for about 5 years. Before that, I taught middle school general music in 2 buildings. I was itinerant. This was outside of Philly. I've learned a lot about myself through the process. I think I got much more out of it than my kids, I think, in terms of growing as a person, teaching music in spaces where there perhaps wasn't as much going on, or the students had opted out of kind of a deeper experience, and that kind of shaped me as a teacher, trying to get everyone to join the band. So I'm just really excited to be here to kind of talk about that.
That's wonderful. I'm glad you're here too. You and I had an opportunity to talk together during the Louisiana Music Educators in Service. back in November, and I was just so excited to work with you as we work with all of the college directors and talking about how we can create more diversity in the music education programs in the state of Louisiana. Joining us, folks, is Dr. Connie Mccoy, and we want you to just tell us a little bit about yourself, Connie, and everything that you have going on right now, and then we're going to jump right into it.
Well, thank you, William. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody this evening. I'm Connie Mccoy. I am the Director of Undergraduate Studies in the School of Music at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. I'm in my 20th year there, but I've also taught P-12 schools for about 20 years as well. So I'm what some of the kids will call an old head.
Old school.
Culturally responsive teaching has been a focus of my research for the past 15 years or so. So I'm really pleased to be able to be a part of this panel this evening.
I am also pleased that you can join us as well. It is very important. This is a very important discussion that we're about to have tonight. And I think we need to underline that by saying it can get a little touchy. It can get a little, people can get a little uncomfortable. But we want to keep it as I guess you say, as comfortable as we can with getting you the right information. We think that we want you to make sure that everybody takes away from this conversation the fact that it's not going to be solved in one night. It's not going to be solved in 1 hour, nor the little 15 or 20 minutes we're going to be in Zoom later. But it can be a work in progress. And this all came about, this whole thing of 12 for 12 came about because of all of the things that our leadership is doing in LMEA. They're making sure that we're paying attention to DEI, that we're paying attention to advocacy, that we're more vocal with our legislators and all that. And they wanted to make sure that we touch on the real topics. So Brett is on, and he may come on later just to say thank you for you all being on. And I know our LMEA president, Mr. Scotty Walker, is in the audience as well. And so I just want to jump right in and ask this serious question. What is culturally responsive teaching? What is it? I think, Connie, I'm going to come to you first, just because that's been a big part of your research. Tell me, what is culturally responsive teaching?
Well, there are two major proponents of culturally responsive teaching, Gloria Ladson-Billings and Geneva Gay. And in my own research, I have tended to use the definition that Geneva Gay provides, which is using the knowledge base that students bring to the classroom to be more effective in teaching them. And that is understanding that students come to the classroom with a lot of information about this particular discipline that might be taught in that classroom, and that knowledge base or that information is culturally informed. And that as teachers, we need to recognize that, we need to value that information that they bring with them to us. And we can use that information as a bridge to new learning for them because part of our job as teachers is to expose students to information that they're not aware of. And so if we can start out with the information that they have and value that can also be a springboard or a scaffold to new learning for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know if you can still hear me. I see my video kind of froze, but you can still hear me. Just give me a thumbs up. All right, great. I want to go on a little further and say to Alfred, who's been doing this for quite some time, and one of my former teachers as well in the Atlanta Olympic Band, how have you been culturally responsive in your teaching efforts over the past few years? I did say few.
Well, thank you so much. And I loved Connie's description of the topic, and I think it aligns so much with what I believe. It's a challenging process for many. My greatest notion is for the teachers to simply listen to the children and to pay attention to the children and be socially active as you go about the process of building yourself. I'll give you a case in point. Our I find that the elementary teachers in our state and probably in our society, or I call them our truest music teachers. Many others in the above that, in the upper grades perhaps, focus an awful lot on performance and evaluation and those kinds of activities. And we sometimes can lose sight of the fact that we're teaching individual children. We're giving them the best of ourselves. I learned a valuable lesson almost 30 years ago when my youngest son came home. And he's the son of a band director. He listened to a little bit of everything in the car and in the house as we moved about. But my wife called me from rehearsal one day and she said, Alf, come home. She said, your son is looking for a CD and he's tearing the house apart to find it. He's in elementary school music. And so I said, look, I'm in rehearsal. I can't get home right now. I've got a band to teach. She said, you need to come home. So I'd go home, and my youngest one was probably first grade, and he was tearing the basement apart. The CDs were everywhere, and he was looking for that one song. He had studied in music class. So which song do you look for, John? Are you looking for? He said, the song that goes da-da-da-da, Dad. We studied it in class today, and I wanted to hear it again. And so I patiently went through Beethoven, found the Fifth Symphony, sat down with him and played it. He'd heard the song before. He'd heard all the things. But that day, he wanted to be Beethoven. He wanted to hear the sounds of Beethoven. And so I learned years ago that we teach them where they are, understanding their cultural backgrounds that may be different from the cultural background that we have. And I'll move forward unless someone else answers some more questions. We'll come back to it. But I wanted to put that little bug in there right now.
Absolutely. Alyssa, you do a lot of stuff with composition and some music theater and things like that. I know you deal with a lot culturally in your work. How is it that you're able to how are you successful? I wouldn't say you call yourself successful, but how are you successful integrating multiple cultures, integrating the students first or those performers first that you work with and delivering an awesome performance?
For me, it's about, kind of building on what's been said already. I like to think of cultural responsivity as mindset over matter, right? And that's new language for me. I did some work with the New York City DOE. Can you still hear me okay? The New York City DOE music department. I got to, sit in on some PD and deliver a keynote recently in my work with Liz over there. She was really, really thinking about and used the language mindset, right? Helping teachers kind of move the needle on their mindset in terms of who their students are, who they have in the classroom, what their capacity is, what they're bringing to the table, and the value of all of that, right? And so I started to think, mindset over matter, right? The who and why over the what. And that's really what kind of fuels me in my writing and in my work, not only with the performers that I work with now, which I treat it like my classroom. The theater rehearsal feels like music class to me, which I don't know for better or for worse if that's good or not. And then also with the teachers that I work with, the adults that I work with, both, in the arts and outside. What we think about our students and the lives they live and the experiences they bring to the table, that's more important than the things that we're adding to our spaces and adding to our calendar and adding to our curriculum. Those things are in service to the people in the room, right? The outcomes are an expression of what we've done with them. They aren't the reason. Yeah. And so when we get to the point where we understand and really in our mindset believe, right? And the mind is here it's not here in our work, it's here. Where we truly believe that, then it becomes easier to frame your work and to build to design the learning, right?
Connie, I'm seeing you shake your head a lot. You want to comment on what Alyssa just talked about?
No, I'm like a lot of folks who grew up in a particular church environment. When somebody's speaking to you and you are on board with that, you are going to nod your head. So that's really where a lot of that was coming from, because the mindset over matter is really a critical aspect of any attempt to teach in a culturally responsive way, because it's not something that you can just, when you were talking the other day about, you can't give tips and tricks about it. It's a disposition. And dispositions are developed over long periods of time. I would say they're lifelong in development. And so when she said mindset over matter, I was like, that's a critical thing to understand.
I'm glad you said that it takes time to make this happen. It doesn't happen overnight, and people don't always accept change. You know, if we're not doing this already, then changing can be hard.
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear from Alfred and then Connie how we can, get our colleagues to be more sensitive to change, especially as it relates to culturally responsive teaching.
Well, I think it's important that we all learn the broader culture from, as opposed to the culture with which we happen to live. You're there in Louisiana, and it's fairly easy for people in Louisiana to learn the culture of the bayou or the culture of northern part of the state, and let that be the main culture with which you learn. However, music is a much broader culture. And so it's critical that each teacher looks inside of themselves and find out how diverse they're becoming, and how diverse is your catalog, how diverse is your playlist. Do you include country music? Do you include the music of the dulcimer? Do you include the African drums? Do you include only the things that you studied in music school, or do you learn the musical culture of the world? And as soon as you can learn the musical culture of the world, then it becomes so exciting for us to share it with our students. And so that's essentially what a classroom is the excitement of sharing what we know and what we've experienced with our students. A part of this, after 45 years after undergraduate education, I'm excited to share something that I learned just 2 or 3 days ago that took me out of my pocket, outside of my comfort zone. So I think that's the biggest thing, is to make sure we're out of our comfort zone to continue to learn. And as a result of that, we'll express that in our classrooms.
That's good, Alfred. I really appreciate you sharing those sentiments. Connie, I know you deal with a lot of undergrads who are getting ready to come out and do what we've been doing for years. And they're coming up during a time where a lot of cultural things are going on, whether it's politics, whether it's religious, where there are so many. It's a hodgepodge of things that are going on. And you're getting them at the very beginning, before they go into the teaching world. What is it that you tell them about changing some of their mindsets before they enter, or how they need to be open to change as they progress through the profession?
When kids, one of the things I have discovered over the years that I've been at UNCG is that when kids come in, and we have a situation when they audition on the audition day, they also have to interview with the music ed faculty if they want to become music educators. And so most students, when they come into interview with us, when we ask them why they want to be a music educator, it's almost always because of a teacher they had. And so they come in with an idea of what music education is based on that experience that they had with that teacher. And depending on how broad that experience was, they may actually come in understanding about how to work with lots of different kinds of kids. But sometimes those experiences haven't been that broad. And it's no fault of the teachers, but it's just that the students have had a specific kind of a limited experience. It was a wonderful experience, I'm sure, but limited. And so I think it's really important for kids, when they're coming through our program, to think really carefully about what their role is as a music educator. Because most of them will say, I want to teach music because I love music and I want to share my love of music with other kids. That's perfectly valid reason to be a teacher. But I know for me, as I have talked to in-service teachers and pre-service teachers, one of the questions I've started asking them to ask themselves or to ask their students is, what do their students want to do musically? And how can they, as those students' teacher, help those students get there?
So
Sometimes, I think that the students that I work with have an idea of what being a music teacher looks like. But I think it's those kinds of questions that force them to kind of rethink what their role is or can be when they get out into the field and start to teach.
I think it's a great thing to point out that involving the students in the decision-making process at all levels is extremely important, especially in the performing ensemble as well, because they have buy-in, they earn that, and they have a sensibility of ownership.
Yeah.
To where they're going to make sure that it's done right. They're going to play this right. They're going to do this right. If you involve them in that, when you're talking about being culturally responsive as peer musicians, culturally responsive as you pay attention to your conductor who may be different than you or it may not look like you, it is important then that you understand that those students who participate in the rule making or the classroom management, if you will definitely have more buy-in and will definitely pay attention more because you're going to be able to guide them. So as we talk about guiding our colleagues for change, it is something to think about in terms of guiding our students. What are some of the successes that you have had as professors, as composers, as conductors, where you may have had an issue with cultural responsiveness, and now you've seen where that kind of changed your mindset? You kind of got rid of some of the implicit biases that may have already been in play. What stood out to you as a changing period of time? What was that thing that catapulted you to being better when it comes to culturally responsive teaching? And I'm going to go right to you, Alyssa.
I am so glad. So this story is teaching in Boston completely changed who I am as a teacher. And I say am, even though I'm not in the classroom anymore. It changed who I am. So I was under 30, right? When I started teaching there. And I was still, still had on that cape, the Change the World cape. Not that you ever get rid of it. It looks a little different when you're, getting started that first couple of years, first 5 or 6 years. The cape is a little bit shinier. Maybe it whips on its own, whatever. And I had come from, a background. I was from the Midwest originally. Then I went to, grades, 5 through 12 in southeastern Pennsylvania. It was big ensemble country. I was raised a Lutheran, right, in the Midwest. So we're singing 4-part harmony from a hymnal in the congregation, right? Pipe organs everywhere. Went to school in the suburbs, and the whole town turns out for the Christmas concert every year, the holiday concert every year. And I get to Boston Arts Academy, which is in Boston Public Schools in the city. And it's one of the only, if not the only, arts high school that does not have an academic requirement to get in. The audition is the only requirement. They do academic testing to make sure that they put you in the right levels of classes. But in terms of how you get in, it's only on your artistic merit. And then it is, how teachable are you, not where are you right now, right? So what is the potential for you to experience exponential growth, right? That's what the intake process is. And it's a major city, right? So I get there and I'm thinking, oh, they brought me in to kind of help expand the choir program. I'm thinking, oh, we need to make sure that the whole city of Boston turns out to every show we do. We need to make sure that and this and that, and why aren't we doing this? And I'm, got my big old Lutheran choir head and all this stuff. And the kids are looking at me like, who are you? And why are you here? And we don't know nothing about Chicago and any, we're not, we're from the Caribbean. We're from the islands. We're from other countries, right? We have a totally different lived experience than you, and we live in a city. And my colleagues looking at me the same way. Who are you? You think you're going to get the entire city of Boston to come to our holiday concert? I had to really change what the music program was for in my mind, right? Why was I teaching music? It was not to recreate my experience. I had to get over that real quick, or else I was not going to make it. And the other thing that I had to shift was, because of the academic requirement, we had a lot of students that struggled with literacy. And I found my second love working there, becoming a summer reading teacher. Went through the school, I've got the paper to prove it. And how I teach reading affected how I teach theory, right? So students that were struggling in my theory classes were also struggling in literature. And so how do we do that? How do we have students make meaning of text in the choir, right? How do we teach, how do you teach phrasing when students are struggling to decode, right? So everything changed. And I became aware that the reason why I make music myself is to make my world make sense. And it wasn't to then share the world that makes sense to me with others, right? It's about how can I help students make their worlds make sense, right? And then foster a sense of agency and empowerment, right? So they feel that they can move in any circle and not worry about being accepted, and still get the thing done that they moved into that space to do, right? So there we go. I'm going to step out.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in being included. Inclusivity is very important to me. Once everybody feels as though they are part of, everybody's going to work as though they want together to be great, and that's just how I've been able to do it the last 20 years. And I as I move forward, I'll continue to do the same thing. There is something in my program for everybody, because as soon as they walk in, it has to be theirs. If it's not, then they won't want to be there, and they won't produce the way you think they want to produce, and they won't produce how they want to produce either. And it's important that they feel comfortable enough to be a part of, and to learn from, and to learn with their peers, because that's how you develop that sense of family. Mr. Watkins, before you get started, because I'm teeing it up for you to talk about your successes in culturally responsive teaching throughout the years, I will say this: you can ask any question you want, audience. You can put it in the chat right now, and Brett and myself will tee it up for one of these great panelists that we have here. Mr. Watkins, you've taught in a lot of different places, and even in the city of Atlanta, you've been on both extremes. How were you able to adapt? How were you able to still be successful on both ends of the spectrum? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you for the question. It's the music and the choice of music that we use as a tool for growth. I believe that every piece of music has a personality, and it has a soul, and it has almost, unless in many cases, has a story. And I found that if students realize the multiplicity of what you're looking for, they will embrace it. If you're playing the Stars and Stripes Forever from March, you didn't talk about how Mr. Souza did much of it on a ship coming across the ocean in ink. So then all of a sudden, Mr. Souza has a story. Or if you're playing a piece on an American hymn song, spirituals, then you talk about how the spirituals are impacted. You're playing a piece from Spain, then you talk about how that culture has impacted this piece of music. And before you know it, you become a teacher that teaches music from all over the world, so that any piece that you deliver to your ensemble will be viable and acceptable. You've got to remember that we have to remember that we have to give them some of what they need and much of what they want, but we can't always give them cotton candy for breakfast. And so part of our responsibility is to make them broader and broader. Speaking of cultural identity, however, you should know that when I first began teaching at Lasseter High School, which was 99.5% Caucasian in the white suburbs of Atlanta. And the students where I taught had no black teachers, male or female, in their tenure. And when I was there, I put Hanukkah on my yearly schedule and the Jewish holidays. And some of my band boosters came to me and they said, we don't have a lot of people that observe Hanukkah here, Mr. Watkins. We don't have a lot of people that observe Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I said, well, how do you know? And so it's more important for the people that didn't share in Hanukkah and didn't share in the Jewish holidays to have them as a part of a document that I had given them. And so that was me all the way through. And there's a part of what we do, it requires courage. It requires courage to convince everyone that you are kind of assigned to this job. And you're different than some other teachers in the school. And music literally is universal. And if we believe that, then that's kind of what I have done, is making sure that I introduce and a part of our musical vocabulary is a potpourri of ideas, of composers, of music. And as long as it is done well or composed or arranged orderly, we can make good progress and make good music out of it.
Thank you, Alfred. Thank you for sharing that with us. Connie, I know you got it from both spectrums because you taught in public schools, P through 12 for, upwards of this many years. And now you're at the college level teaching those who will teach for about the same amount of time. I know you probably approached things different when you were in the ranks and you found some new things as you started to do research. What are those overarching ideas that really set themselves as the foundation of what you believe now as it pertains to being culturally responsive in teaching?
Well, I'm actually going to answer the same question that you asked our other panelists because I have a really good story.
Tell it.
And I tell this story everywhere I go. It comes from when I was teaching high school. I had just started teaching at a high school that was historically Black in terms of student population. And one of the things that I always did when I started teaching in a high school, even a middle school, if the school had an alma mater, I would teach that first because I said, well, if anybody needs to know the alma mater, the kids in the choir need to know that. And so as it happened, the alma mater of this school was based on the same melody as the Canadian national anthem. So I had an arrangement, I had a hymn, sort of a homophonic version of that at home in a book. And I pulled it out and sort of rewrote it, added in the text and started teaching it to my kids. And during one of the rehearsals, one of the kids asked me, said, Miss McCoy, this was Miss McCoy at that time, can we sing this like they do? Can we sing this song like they do in the movie Lean On Me? Now, I'm dating myself when I mention this, but for those of you that know, Lean On Me was a movie that came out some 30 years ago, starring Morgan Freeman, and he played Principal Joe Clark, who was a real person who was known for turning around a high school in New Jersey that had some academic problems. Kids were not doing very well academically. And there's a lot of stuff that went on in the movie, but basically one of the things that happened was that a teacher who had been working as a music teaching assistant got to become the music teacher and had helped the kids. The kids hated singing the alma mater, even though Joe Clark would make them sing it, on command, because that was part of his plan to turn the school around. So one day he asked these kids to sing the alma mater and they started singing it, and it was in wonderful 4-part harmony. Like these guys was like doo-wopping it, right? Wonderfully, wonderfully arranged, wonderful version. And the kids liked it, but he wanted to know who was responsible for that, right? Comes to find out the new music teacher was the one that had arranged it. So this student was coming up to me and saying, can you rearrange this song like they did in Lean on Me. And I'm like, oh Lord, I don't know if I can do this or not, because I hadn't really done a lot of arranging myself. So I said, look, I'll make a deal with you. If I go home this weekend and I rearrange this and make it a little more lively, a little jazzier for you, will you learn it both ways? Learn it the jazzy way and then learn it the regular way. Or I shouldn't say the regular way, this way, because either way could be regular depending on where you are. And they said, sure. So I went home. I said, I'm in it now because I've already promised them and I'm going to come up with something. And I worked all weekend and I said, well, this is the best I can do. We're just going to have to see what happens. Came back to class, played the arrangement for them, taught it to them. And I was fortunate enough that they loved it. Not only that, but there were kids in that choir who were like the star singers in their church choirs. And they began to automatically improvise in places in that piece, without my help. They were just doing it. And it was so wonderful that they begged me to let them introduce that version at the next school assembly. So I said, okay, let's do it. They got a standing ovation at the assembly. And for me, as I look back on that was the essence. And I didn't really realize it at the time, but that was the essence of culturally responsive teaching, because the kids came to me with a desire for something a little different. And I was open to it. It would have been really easy for me to say, well, that's not really what I had planned to do. I really need y'all to learn it this way. And if y'all want to learn something else, y'all can go find. I could have had that response. And I also learned from that. And that's another aspect of culturally responsive teaching that I think is really critical, is that the learning is a two-way street. I learned about what my students' capabilities were. I learned about what my own arranging capabilities were. And the students were just ecstatic because someone had listened to them and what they wanted. And they came out with a result that the whole school got to enjoy. And so I talk about that story a lot because I learned so much from it.
I got to tell you through your story, you answered the question. The second question I gave you. I mean, the overarching idea that's the foundation of what you believe and what you teach is the fact that if you reach the students first, if you reach out to the students and what they desire, and you meet them where they are, then you've already gotten most of the battle done with tackling culturally responsive teaching, and that's huge. That's huge. We have a couple of questions in the chat, and I'm going to read one from our good friend Rebecca Holmes. Characteristics of culture and diversity in the music classroom extend well beyond the student we see in front of us. What are some practical strategies you have found to be effective toward implementing culturally responsive teaching opportunities? So what are those steps to implementing culturally responsive teaching that you have taken or that you suggest others take as they embark upon this journey? Who wants to take that?
I'll take it.
That's right. Come on, Alyssa.
It's not steps. It's not steps. This is my shameless plug for the CREATE strand in our standards. So I'm going to high five Mr. Watkins. Every music has a story. I'm going to high five Dr. McCoy, who, as Ms. McCoy, established learning as a two-way street. I find that creativity, creative opportunities, whether it's improvisation, arranging, songwriting, composition, it's all composing, but we like to sort it out. But that's a whole other session. But again, engaging with art is very much about understanding the artist who created it, right, and how they see the world and themselves in it. The act of sharing one's lived experience is the act of challenging others' notions of one's lack. Right? So when you tell your story, it shuts down any doubts someone might have about who you are as a human.
Come on.
Yes? And so a creative curriculum gives students space to tell us who they are using the tools we're trying to teach them, right? It helps us get to those outcomes by asking them to bring themselves into it, right? Entirely. And it's spiralable. That's not a word, but I'm just going to say it. It's spiralable.
Good
right?
word.
Yes, thank you. So
we'll take it. We'll take it.
I'm giving it out today. So that P class, one note and some colors, right? Or rhythms, whatever you're doing. It's solfege, kodai, orff, all these things, right? That we do in our rooms. From the very, very smallest students that we teach, they can create their own music and build on that, right? If you're talking about students that need support with literacy, and how often are we asked to incorporate reading and writing into our curriculum because we're trying to
every day.
Yes, right. So having students create text, right? Whether to sing the text or be inspired by the text to create something else, yeah. So as much opportunity as we can create for students to make work in the music classroom, right? That is the biggest tip that I have, right? So rather than labor over how am I going to find this composer, do that too. Please do that too, right? Who are we going to talk about when we're choosing repertoire, we're choosing whose music to study. Do that too. But then also make room for students to tell you who they are through what they put on the page, what they improvise into the air, how they collaborate to create a piece of music. That's the biggest tip. For me, that's the fail-safe. That's the default. When I can't figure out how to engage people, I go right there. And it works every time.
Thank you so much for sharing that powerful story. And I want to say this. Casey Julian, I see your question. I'm going to paraphrase that a little bit. Thank you for joining us from Oakland University's Collegiate Chapter at NAFME. I appreciate you coming in. And Casey is talking about this from a standpoint from a college student. There's a lot going on in the world with things such as gender issues. We have Black Lives Matter. We have all these things going on, and we everything has been made political, and we try to shy away from that in this webinar series. However, it's something that you have to touch on. So I would love to use this as a lab opportunity for the great Dr. McCoy to talk about how you handle such important driving issues in today's world delicately, but still get your point across and still make things happen in the classroom with that agenda that you may have on the board or that lesson plan of the observers coming in to see if you're doing it correctly. How do you handle that when you know you have students that are going through at home or going through in their neighborhoods or going through in their relationships, and you still have to get things done in the classroom?
I think any situation, teaching situation, begins and ends with a relationship. You have to have a relationship with your students. And I think we're really fortunate to be teaching in an arts medium, because the arts deal with who we are as human beings, our means of expressing who we are as human beings. And it's often the one place, I don't care whether it's music room, band room, choir, orchestra, general music classroom, art room, dance class, theater. Those are the places where kids get to express who they are. So this really goes along a lot with what Alyssa was saying. I think you have to be really careful that you have established a caring relationship with your students in order to be able to engage with these sensitive topics with them. I would not advise anybody to jump into that if you have not develop that kind of relationship with your kids, because it can blow up in your face. I'm just going to be honest. And the other side of that is that there are a lot of people who haven't practiced doing it, so they're not comfortable with it. And your kids are going to know if you're not comfortable. But one of the things I think we can do is we can make room for kids to bring who they are, the totality of who they are, into our classroom. Because I think this is my personal philosophy. I am not aware of any person from any culture who makes or who organizes sound that is not influenced or within a context of their lives. People can talk about making music over here, it's objective, it's, no, it's not. Music is human expression. And if we only approach it like it's just about those dots on the page and doesn't have anything to do with us and the lives we live and the society we live in, then we're forgetting, we're not doing music and music making justice. That's why we make music. It's a part of who we are. And so I think that to the extent that students have an understanding that one of the things we want for them as teachers is to be able to express themselves musically, whether they're making their own music or whether they're recreating somebody else's music, to the extent that they understand that that's their birthright and that's a part of who they are, we can make room for them to express how they're feeling about the things that are going on in their lives. And as a matter of fact, if I connect to the things that Alyssa was just saying, this could be a springboard for wonderfully meaningful, creative activities for students. If out of all the arts, I'm gonna get on a soapbox now. I'm sorry, y'all. I'll make it quick.
Come on, somebody.
Out of all the arts areas that I'm aware of, it's music that generally we don't do as much to help kids create, to organize sound. You go to a dance class, they're choreographing all over the place, making up something new. You go to theater, yes, they have plays and things that are recreated, but they also have improv, big part of it. You go to art class, the kids come out of art class almost every single time with something new that didn't exist before. We don't do that as much. And I'm not saying we can't be creative in replicating or redoing or recreating the works that other people have composed, but we don't do a whole lot of things that allow students to organize sound, which is the essence to me of expressing who you are creatively. Certainly,
Connie,
you can do it in lots
Connie,
of ways.
We can pass the collection plate now, Connie. You preaching tonight.
I'm just saying.
You're preaching tonight.
So yeah, I think we have an opportunity if we are comfortable with it, and if we have that kind of relationship with kids, and I really have to emphasize that has to be in place. If we have that kind of relationship with students, there is space, for them to be able to bring that in and utilize it.
Yes, absolutely.
Ways that adhere or that correspond with the content and the things that we are supposed to be helping them achieve in terms of their musicianship.
Thank you, Dr. McCoy. You have we get into the meat of things now. Yes, Deb Confredo has a great question here. And Mr. Watkins, I'm gonna throw this one at you. Can you provide some advice on how music educators can become responsible members of the community in which they serve to grow their levels of cultural awareness and respect?
Would you ask that again, William?
Absolutely. Can you provide some advice on how music educators can become responsible members of the community in which they serve to grow their levels of cultural awareness and respect?
Yes, it takes time. And the expression that I give to many music educators is hashtag poco a poco.
Yes, we use it. We use it a lot.
Yeah, if you use it, please give me credit. We
Licensing
are
issues.
often products of our formal training, and which, in my impression, is need of a fix. Our formal training in America allows for a student to earn terminal degrees without being required to study the music of over one half the peoples of the world. So by its design, we have a problem. And so we are charged partially with being the part of the music persons in our community, but we can't do what we learned after as a part of our college background only. We have to remember that the term commencement is a French word, which means to begin. It doesn't mean to end. And so as soon as we accept the fact that the commencement at any level is the beginning of the next stage of our life, then our growth can occur. And then leading others becomes a lot easier when you have a broader knowledge. 2 or 3 days, I'm going to put this one in real fast because I want to tell you 2 stories. One of them is about a week ago, I'm a night owl, and I was up just discovering and seeing what I can continue to learn, because now I have time to learn more information. I'm retired. And I bumped into a 2002 video of the legendary singers and musicians Luciano Pavarotti and James Brown, the soul singer. It's 2002, it was in Italy. Pavarotti was senior, very senior, and I think it was 1 year before he passed away. And they were on stage singing James Brown's piece of music, This Is a Man's World. By the way, women had the conjunction, but it wouldn't be nothing without a woman or a girl, from the 1960s. And if anybody knows the tune, if you don't know it, look it up. It's on Luciano Pavarotti's Facebook page. Well, I found it, not James Brown's. They were on stage singing together, and this is what we have to learn to do, I think, need to learn to do. It was a string introduction. The piece had a string accompaniment to it. It had all the underpinnings of the orchestral sound, with James Brown doing his James Brown singing. And he sang the first verse. Pavarotti sang an Italian song as the second verse as a counter melody. James Brown went back to singing the B theme again and got to the bridge. Pavarotti sang this one. And you've not lived until you sing James Brown's backup singers doing doo-wop to Pavarotti's aria on top. And when they finished it, is when the learning occurs. They finished it and they looked at each other before they took a bow. And they walked to center stage. They must have been 10 or 12 feet apart. They walked to center stage and gave each other the largest embrace you can ever imagine. So for the classical snobs out there, Pavarotti had it figured out. And for the funk meisters out there, so did James Brown. And they had a mutual love and a mutual admiration for what the other person's music was. And it was a beautiful moment that we can still use as a signature for our continued growth and our continued learning. So you do that on a concert. And yes, you dare to be courageous enough to do that on a concert so that all the peoples of the world feel like that music is worthy. Lastly, at last one of my second year, I had a tenor saxophone player in one of the younger bands that had this, what I thought was a horrible sound. It was loud, it was boisterous, and I turned to him and I said, "Young man, you sound just like Boots Randolph." Now, I just dated myself. Boots Randolph was a tenor saxophone player in the 40s and 50s who had a great hit called Yakety Sax. He was one of the first soloists on a saxophone that performed. And the little boy looked up at me with this big smile on his face. He said, "Thank you, that's my granddad." And I swallowed, because I was just about to criticize his non-classical sound. And I realized that maybe Boots Randolph had something that I didn't have. And I changed. And so I began to grow. So I won't talk much more about that, but if you listen to your children, I had mine to write out essays on who they were and what they wanted to get accomplished in our class that year, and what music they enjoyed listening to, what music they wanted to discover. And they did it every year. Every student did it. And it was amazing how much they changed over the time. So when they entered my classroom, I knew exactly what they were into, even the quiet and shy ones that wanted the Hanukkah song.
Yes, we're learning a lot tonight, folks. We're learning a lot. Christopher Cook, I'm not gonna miss your question because it's the meat and potatoes of what we're doing tonight. So this is from Chris Cook, y'all, from UNCG, Dr. McCoy. Mr. Watkins talked about a diet of music. What does that diet look like percentage-wise in terms of culture, theory, Western influences, popular music, and ensembles? What is considered the meat, potatoes, veggies, and cotton candy? And before I give it to Mr. Watkins, I'll tell you, Chris, I do a session with a few of my friends, Jack Eady and Mickey Smith Jr. and Marcus Morris from South Carolina, called You Are What You Eat, a look at a healthy band diet. And what we talk about is the fact that we, as the educator side of the agreement in the classroom, must make sure that we make available all aspects of music from different cultures as much as possible. And guess what? One's going to be the meat and potatoes one day, one's going to be the dessert the other. You have to mix and mingle all of that up so that you're making sure that all of your students feel like the music that represents them is just as important as the music that may represent somebody else. Again, we're going to the students to find out what they desire so that we can develop a plan that makes sure that the learning capabilities in the classroom continue to flourish. Mr. Watkins, you talked a little bit earlier about cotton candy, giving them the cotton candy and giving the students a little bit of what they want and a lot of what they need, and sometimes vice versa. Can you tell Chris Cook a little bit more about what that diet looked like in your tenure as a band director?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'll do it as briefly as I can. We're running short on time. I think Dr. Irving answered a bit of it already. And Chris, you answered it with your question. One thing I would remind you of is that in my classroom, a portion of my class was structural skills. I taught school band, and the student had to learn how to set the armature and how to be reminded of so many things that were pedagogically sound to allow for them to have a broad vocabulary to play a wide range of music, from some simple to some very complex. If you just pass out a lot of music and it just sounds bad, you won't have an enjoyable musical experience. So joy comes with the beauty and the excellence of music, in addition to what you're doing. Let me give you a bit of another case in point. So that's an important part, that the structural component is not ignored, that they must learn to do these things in order for them to get to this point over here that you'd like for them to get to. The second part about it is we would read a lot of music that would take 3 to 5 minutes. So I could do a minuet, a trio, a waltz, and a jazz waltz in 5 minutes in the context of the structural part of the class. Doesn't mean I'm going to play the minuet and the trio on the next concert, but I take it back to what we learned in many of the other classes. In English, we learn subject-verb agreement. We learn to put the nouns and pronouns and the conjunction and things in, and they learn to construct a sentence. Then a paragraph. They put these paragraphs together, and they'll have some sort of an essay. In chemistry, they have the periodic tables that you can't get very far unless you learn the periodic tables. And in mathematics, we have the boulders or the structures of arithmetic. And you can't get to the next level until you pass the times tables, we used to call them, the multiplication tables. In music, we tend not to do that. We tend to teach them how to play some songs by rote without giving them the fundamentals. So if you could just remember that this component is critical, and then the other component is equally as critical. But you don't have to work on a 5-minute piece for 3 months to allow for the child to have a lot of expression in that 5-minute piece for 3 months. And that's the short answer. I think that the things that you just said were critical, as long as we don't spend forever applying those.
Absolutely.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, and then we're going to start to close things down.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, just real quick. I just want to also remind us to, as we're being culturally responsive, to avoid the tendency, or try to shake off the tendency to do the food group sorting in the first place of the repertoire, right? Because that sets us up. because we're going to come to that we're going to come to that with our own biases. Yeah. So the stuff we like, or the stuff we were taught as the quality music in this setting, and I do this with the quality because that word makes me crazy, because it's a loaded term, and it's a nice way that we say something else that we're trying not to say. I did my face. I'm sorry. I couldn't help it.
Come on. We saw it. That's all right. That's all right.
I'm not down for the sorting, right? That's about mindset. What I am excited about is that diet being about isolating those skills, which is what I believe that Mr. Watkins is getting to. You isolate the skills, and then you build as many ways to get at that skill as you can. How many different kinds of music in the world do long tones? Kind of all of them. All of them do. So it doesn't have to be out of standard of excellence. It doesn't have to be out of, 24 Italian arias. We don't have to sing Caro Mio Ben in order to learn. We don't have to, right? It's the skill that's important, not the way we practice it. The way we practice it, that's where the cultural responsive practice comes. Find as many different ways to practice that skill. Make it about the skill and not about which music is cotton candy and which music is meatloaf. The end.
Well, now, boy, I tell you, we have gone from.
Amen.
I know. Boy, we come down to the end and y'all start going, man. I tell you, that's something.
We done got warmed up. I need my fan.
Right.
I already brought fan. I need to go grab it from over here.
It's getting hot in here.
Yeah. So, look, I will say this, and we're going to close with Michael Kemp's question, because it can be a round robin where you all can give your closing statements to it. So, and this is a very good question, but I want to say first that you all have been knocking it out the park. And I really appreciate you bringing us your genuine thoughts and your understandings on what you have portrayed as culturally responsive teaching, and what you continue to teach your students and display as you work in music every day, even though you're retired. Alfred, you're still working in music every day. All right. So listen, this is from Michael Kemp, and we're going to start with you, Connie. So just listen carefully. This is an amazing experience. Thank you, Michael. And he has one question. He is a student studying to be a teacher, but he is not concentrating in music. So he was wondering if you all have any advice or can give some things to remember so that he, as a history teacher, can make sure that he is a culturally responsive teacher. I love it.
Well, I'll just bring it back, ended the way I started it, by saying, the most important thing is to value the knowledge that students bring to the classroom. Particularly with history, I think you have a really rich opportunity to make connections with kids in relationship to what they have experienced themselves, what they know historically, what things have happened in the past that maybe have had impact on their community. Finding out things about your students in relationship to the subject matter that you teach is like a fundamental beginning process, because knowing them helps you determine how you can best make connection with them in your discipline. And it also can enable you to find out things from them that can actually enrich your discipline in the way that you teach it. So get to know your students. Find out things about your students that can enhance your curriculum would be my biggest suggestion.
And I'm going to slide one in before it goes to Alyssa. I'm going to say, Michael, don't be afraid to use music in that history lesson either. Go ahead, Alyssa.
Very simply, don't teach history. Teach the whole story. That's it. Don't teach history.
Oh, man.
Teach the whole
story. Yeah.
Sorry. Now I'm like, don't teach history. Teach the whole story. There we go.
Professor Watkins, what do you want to leave us with tonight?
Very much the same thing as I said before. Just recognize that your college years are representative of study. and the rest of the information that you gain, you'll gain after that time. Make sure you stay open-minded and recognize that some of the things that you studied in college probably were culturally biased, even in history. And if you can take that veil off of it as you continue to grow, it will help you more than you'll ever know.
Thank you so much, folks. We're going to close it up for tonight on Webinar Jam. However, if you're looking at the chat and you'll see that there's a Zoom link there, you can start heading to Zoom now, just if you want to allow us to see you, and you can talk back and forth for about 15 or 20 minutes because we have our panelists till the 30 mark of the hour, and we want to make sure that we at least let them get to bed if they need, because some of them on the East Coast, we got to make sure they get to bed and everything so they can be great educators or great retired educators tomorrow. So we want to make sure that you get a chance to do that. I am very appreciative of Scotty Walker and Brett Babineau for allowing me to moderate this very first 12 for 12 webinar series. And I am looking forward to next month on April the 13th, when my good friend Deb Confredo will moderate a session on social emotional learning with Bob Morrison and Scott Edgar. I promise you'll learn a lot that night as well. So you can log off now, folks, and we'll see you on Zoom in just a little while.